everyone, instead of making an overview video for parts 3 and 4 separately, I wanted to go ahead and combine them. So we're going to talk about chapters 17 through chapters 36. Don't worry, we're not going to read every single thing, and a lot of the chapters are actually quite short. The reason I want to do this is because this is a section of the book of Enoch that is where Enoch is traveling through the earth and this place called Sheol. Now Sheol is a place that it doesn't have a very strict definition. It sort of depends on who you ask, what they believe, what time period you're asking about as well. For some people, they talk about Sheol as sort of a holding place, sort of a waiting place for Judgment Day. And that's when all the souls are judged at the same time, and then they're sent to a place of beauty or not. Now, not can also be another way that Sheol is interpreted, which is like hell, like the idea of a Christian hell, a place of punishment after judgment. But there's also a type of interpretation of Sheol that is just death itself, the end of your existence. This is seen in other cultures as well, such as the ancient Egyptian belief that you had to pass through a bunch of trials and mazes and that sort of thing to get your soul to the afterlife. If you failed, you just ceased to exist. So this could be discussing that as well when we're talking about Sheol. However, Enoch actually sees it. He visits it. He goes there. And so that's why we're kind of talking about this as a single idea in a single video. So Enoch is taken by two angels. We're talking about Uriel and Raphael, the two archangels of several. So he's taken around. And that's what we're going to be seeing throughout this section. He's flown around, it appears, not so much teleported, but physically transported around by these angels. So he's taken to a place of darkness. He sees mountains. We're going to see a lot of mountains in these chapters ahead. He also sees the depths of everything. He sees thunder. He sees the mouths of all the rivers. That's the end point of all the rivers, the mouth of the deep. There's also a place that he sees, which is the setting of the sun, the area where the sun sets. So this is similar to the Quran, how it talks about a physical place on earth where the sun physically goes into and rests every night. So that's something else that he sees here. So this appears to be a place where it's the great ending. When we were reading this first, it appeared sort of as if it was a great starting point or the start and end of things, but it appears this is like the end of the earth. So this is the ending of the earth, and now he's going to see what's after this, or what's beyond the natural world that we are allowed to walk. In fact, he says he goes to a place where no flesh walks. So there's this section of the earth, or just outside of the earth, where humans, animals, and that sort of thing are just not allowed to be. The most strange part here is where he talks about a fiery bow and arrows in their quiver, and a fiery sword and all of their lightnings. This could be a descriptive or interesting sort of take on how to describe something in nature, because we see fiery sword, fiery bow and arrow, and lightning. So it could be a way to describe lightning. Or it could be a literal bow of fire, a literal arrow of fire. And the quiver here is the noun, not the verb. So this would be a place that you put your bows. It's sort of that bow, or not their bows, sorry, your arrows. It's sort of that arrow holder pouch that sits on your back. Why they're described that way, it doesn't really explain much more. So we're going to go ahead and just move on to chapter 18, but just remember that this is where we are, at the edge of the earth, the end of all things on the earth. He also sees where the winds are held. We're going to see later on in these chapters that he's actually going to talk about the north wind and the south wind. These were some ideas that were very prevalent around Enoch's time, that the north wind was responsible for certain types of natural disasters or different types of weather, and the south wind had its own responsibility for different weather patterns and also destructive weather. So he sees the cornerstones of the earth. He sees the four winds, the north, south, east, and west winds. The firmament of heaven. So this is part of the old Jewish idea, and actually there's some flat earthers that have taken this idea from the Bible, and so they also use this idea in their flat earth model. But the earth is flat, it stands on something, and it also has a dome over it. Okay. Outside of it is the cosmos, or winds, or stars, or waters, that sort of thing. So those are periodically allowed into the dome, and we'll see that later on in these chapters as well. So he continues on saying, I saw the winds of heaven which turn and bring the circumference of the sun and all the stars to their setting. So this is the wind that moves sun and stars. So it's not exactly accurate, but we will continue on. So these winds also carry clouds, and he sees the paths of angels as well. So he proceeds to a place that burns day and night, where there's 7 mountains of magnificent stones, and he talks about these positions. There's 3 towards the east, 3 towards the south. There's 1 in the middle, and they're colored in different colors. There's a pearl one, there's a jacinth one, which is sort of a similar color to like an amber or a garnet color. So this is sort of a reddish, dark red, orange kind of color. And then there's also a red stone. But there's 1 in the middle, and that one reaches to the throne of God like alabaster. Now I do want to make sure that you guys are able to listen to this video and not need to look at any of these images on the screen, but I do want to provide these images for you if you are watching. So alabaster is a type of stone that when it's carved, it's almost translucent in a way that you can see through skin in a type of way. In fact, very, very thin slices of alabaster were used as windows in the past on these old churches, for example. So if you can see here, it's this sort of ethereal looking, it's white, but almost translucent. It has a very heavenly or holy kind of appearance to it. I really think it's a very gorgeous type of stone to use for carving. So that is what's in the middle. It's this mountain that looks like this. And it's actually the physical throne of Yahweh for when Yahweh comes down. And at the top, there's actually a throne, and that's made of sapphire. And so Enoch continues saying that he sees flaming fire, and beyond the mountains is the end of earth, where the heavens are completed. And now he actually can look over the edge of the earth, and he looks down into this deep abyss, and he says that there's columns of heavenly fire, and the fire falls, and he can't see how far down it goes. And so the way that I kind of see this in my mind's eye when I was reading this, it's sort of these columns that go down as far as his eye can see, but these columns are sort of undulating fire. They're kind of a flowing fire, and it's not just fiery looking or brightly colored. It's just this moving type of fire, and he sees this fire rising and falling. So it's really an interesting kind of concept, because they're columns of fire. So this isn't as if the earth is cooking over a large campfire, for example. And there he sees that there is basically a place that has no firmament. There's no earth. It's just sort of a nothingness. There's no water, no birds. It's just a waste, and he calls it a horrible place. And he sees there are 7 stars. And it's pretty interesting, because he asks one of the angels, why are these stars here? And one of the angels replies, this place is the end of heaven and earth. This has become a prison for the stars and the host of heaven. And the stars which roll over the fire are they which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord in the beginning of the rising, because they did not come forth at their appointed times. And he was wroth with them, and bound them till the time when their guilt should be consummated, even for 10,000 years. Which is very interesting, because in the first few chapters of the book of Enoch, we are told that Yahweh is in control of everything. Everything moves perfectly because he has set it to be perfect. the stars move because he has said so, and there's no error. And that the trees are blooming in the spring and summer because that's what he decided. He set this up this way. And now we see 7 stars which did not follow these instructions. We're never told if the stars chose to be disobedient as if they had free will, or if these were just programmed stars that have failed to do as they were intended to do because the programming had failed. But it's interesting that instead of punishing or just fixing the programming, Yahweh has decided to punish stars. And it's kind of interesting that the stars are punished by being burned, considering the stars are kind of a ball of fiery gas anyway. So again, this is not really described or explained. Now, when we're talking about stars, sometimes people think, well, maybe it's referring to angels. But again, this is not described beyond this. Let's go to the next chapter. Great. So Uriel, the other angel that is with him, says, "Here shall stand the angels who have connected themselves with women, and their spirits, assuming many different forms, are defiling mankind and shall lead them astray into sacrificing to demons as gods. Here they shall stand till the day of great judgment, in which they shall be judged till they are made an end of. And the women also of the angels who went astray shall become sirens. And I, Enoch, alone saw the vision and the ends of all things, and no man shall see as I have seen." So these are referring to the Watchers, that this place where the stars are being punished, this is where the Watchers are going to be. And when they're talking about being judged, and they will be judged till they are made an end of, it appears as if that judgment, it includes a punishment. So it is a type of punishment. We're also seeing here that women, the wives of these Watchers, become sirens. So these are the mythological creatures that live in the water and sing to sailors that are passing by, and sailors will travel to try to find these what sound like beautiful women singing to them, and then their boats crash and they get devoured. It's kind of interesting that this is where they end up, not only as another mythological concept, but that even though they're human, they don't have a human punishment. They are not sent to the place where human souls are sent, which we actually will talk about later on in these chapters. So here we are in chapter 20. So Uriel is here, Raphael is here, and Raguel is here. Michael is here. Sarachiel is here, and Gabriel and Ramiel. Those are all here as well. So these are just talking about the 7 archangels and their functions. If you guys are curious about them, you can read this in chapter 20. So that is just explaining their jobs very briefly. So now Enoch is going to a place of chaos, and he says that he sees something horrible. There's not a heaven above or a firmly founded earth, but it's just chaos, and it's horrible. The 7 stars are bound there, and he asks again, why are they like that? And Uriel responds to him saying, "Enoch, why do you ask? Why are you so eager for truth? These are the number of stars in heaven that, didn't listen to God, so they're bound here." It's kind of interesting. It's pretty much a rehash of what we read in the other chapter, but Uriel starts with, why are you asking this stuff? Why are you eager for the truth? So it's interesting because why show Enoch this if you don't want him to really understand it? It's almost as if they want to just show him, so he writes down, there's a scary place, be scared of it. So you just kind of, you as the reader, just understand Yahweh has great power and will execute great punishment. Don't ask questions about it. Remember, we had this situation with the Garden of Eden, right? Where they were punished for consuming knowledge. So that is another thing to remember. So now they send Enoch, or they take him to another place. He says it's a place more horrible than the former, and I saw a horrible thing. A great fire there which burnt and blazed, and the place was cleft as far as the abyss, being full of descending columns of fire. Neither its extent nor magnitude could I see, nor could I conjecture. Then I said, how fearful is this place, and how terrible to look upon. And Uriel responds again, why are you so scared? And I thought this was kind of funny because it's like, maybe you're not scared, Uriel, but you gotta remember this is Enoch. He's a human. He's scared of this, and Enoch is like, because this place is scary and it looks painful, and Uriel's like, yeah, well, it's a place for angels to be imprisoned. Don't worry about it. That's kind of the impression. Uriel is not the best tour guide, as we're gonna continue to see here. In this chapter, we get some sections. You can read, if you're going to read these, you want to read either section E or section G. G. They basically are the same. They have a slightly different translation. So they're not two separate ways to read it. It's just they're two slightly different things. So basically what happens here is that Enoch looks down into this great abyss, and he sees that there are these different sections that are split up, and he sees there's souls inside of them, including Abel, like the brother of Cain who was killed, and Abel is here. This is where everyone is hanging out until Judgment Day happens. So when you die, your soul goes to this cave, basically, and you just wait. And then when you're judged, then you are sent off to continue into an afterlife. And we'll see the types of afterlives you can get to. But we see there's already one that sucks. It's for stars, it's for angels. But it's interesting that they do split up this waiting room. So one of the waiting rooms is for the righteous people. Cool. The other waiting room is for people who were unrighteous, like they did some horrible thing in their lifetime and were punished for it in their lifetime. So for example, if you're a serial killer, you were punished for being a serial killer by being put into prison. Perhaps you were executed, something like that. Then you go into this other place. But there's also a third section for people who were bad during their life and not punished during their life. So again, to use the serial killer example, you're a serial killer, nobody caught you, you lived your life, and then you died. In this part of the waiting room, you actually are punished. So kind of an interesting concept. So even before you've reached hell, you start your punishment. And that's sort of what we see here with the Watchers as well. They're bound before they're punished. So it's kind of a reflection of that in a way. We're going to go on to chapter 23, but I am going to drink some tea first. My throat is becoming a bit dry. I do apologize, but I guess for those of you who like ASMR, maybe not so good. So Enoch is now taken to another place where there's fire that just burns. And it moves as well. It appears to be a moving fire. It has a course or path that it follows, and it just continues to go. And so Enoch is like, what is this? Why is it moving around? And Raguel, one of the angels that's with him, says, this is the course of fire in the west, which destroys or persecutes or judges or punishes all of the luminaries of heaven. So this is a great burning fire for all of the bad stars, basically. Literally stars. So now we're seeing more mountains. He's taken to another place, and he sees a mountain range of fire. So this fire is burning day and night. When we were looking at this, some people thought, well, could this be talking about lava? Possibly, but I don't think that this is what it's talking about. When we see like a mountain range made out of fire, this is going to be that the entire thing is erupting in fire. It's consumed with fire, which sounds very extra, I know, but that's the whole point of what Enoch is witnessing during this section of the Book of Enoch. So as he's looking at these burning mountains, beyond them he sees another 7 mountains. The 7 mountains have different stones that cover them. They're very beautiful, and we see that they are 3 in the east and then 3 in the south, and there's one upon the other in deep rough ravines, no one of which joined with any other. We weren't really sure if they were talking about one behind or literally on top of. So it doesn't really explain it. It's not really explained in the later chapters either. So it is a bit difficult to try to get sort of a visual of this. But it appears that there are three mountains together physically on top of each other, and that there's these ravines, these deep creeks or deep rivers cut into the rock, but they never come together. So they all just sort of spread out in their own directions. And then we see another of these mountains again. It's the seventh mountain. It's in the middle. It has a throne. And around this, we're actually seeing a bunch of beautifully scented trees. And Enoch writes, "And amongst them was a tree such as I had never smelt, neither was any amongst them, nor were the others like it. It had a fragrance beyond all fragrance, and its leaves and blooms and wood wither not forever, and its fruit is beautiful, and its fruit resembles the dates of a palm. And then I said, how beautiful is this tree, and fragrant, and its leaves are fair, and its blooms very delightful in appearance. And then answered Michael, one of the holy angels who was with me, and he says, Enoch, why do you ask me about the regarding of the fragrance of the tree, and why do you wish to learn the truth? And so I said to him, well, I just want to know about everything, but especially this tree. And so Michael answers, well, this is a high mountain, the thing that you're looking at, and on top of it, that's where the throne for Yahweh is. And so when this dude comes down physically onto earth, boom, this is where he's sitting. And he's going to visit the earth with goodness. And for this fragrant tree, no mortal is allowed to touch it until the great judgment. And then Yahweh's going to do all of this vengeful stuff. But this tree, he's going to be giving this to you for your food. This is for people that are righteous and holy, and the Lord is going to basically make this place really beautiful for all you guys to enjoy. So what this is basically saying is, here's some fruit, you're going to eat it. And I know that doesn't seem like it's really super exciting, but you have to remember during Enoch's time, fruit is going to be probably the sweetest thing you're going to encounter on your day-to-day life. Yes, there's honey, but that's going to be a lot more expensive. For the average person reading this, they're not going to have a life where they have a lot of really delicious fruits that are sweet and juicy and wonderful that they're going to be able to consume most of the time. For them, they're going to have a pretty simple, basic diet. It's going to have some pretty simple staples. You're going to get your grains. You're going to get different types of root vegetables. You're going to get some types of meats or just the fat from certain animals if you can't even afford the meat. That's pretty much what you're going to be getting. Yes, you're going to get certain trees or certain fruits from trees. And one thing that Enoch said, it was similar to the dates of the palm. And so that date palm is a really sweet, sugary type of fruit. And this is better than that. And the tree looks cool, and it smells beyond wonderful. And this is the most basic thing you're going to eat. So just think about that. Enoch is looking at this as the most glorious type of food he has ever laid his eyes upon. And he's being told, you think this is amazing? This is going to be your basic food. So imagine how much more wonderful your life is going to be here in the afterlife with Yahweh if this is the most basic core thing that you're going to do every single day, and how wonderful and elevated it is above anything else you've ever experienced. So this really just shows the magnitude of wonder and beauty and amazingness just by showing the most basic part of it. And I think that's a really interesting way to kind of underscore just how amazing the afterlife will be with Yahweh, just by showing the most basic part of it as, you know, something that far surpasses anything you would encounter today. And so so Enoch and the angels are hanging out here still. The angel tells Enoch, then shall they, the righteous who were blessed by God, rejoice with joy and be glad, and into the holy place they shall enter, and its fragrance shall be in their bones, and they shall live and have a long life on earth, such as their fathers lived. and in their days no sorrow or plague or torment or calamity shall touch them. And so Enoch is really excited, and he starts like saying, "Oh my God, God's so cool. He's amazing. He's preparing such awesome, amazing things for us, and he promised to give it to us, and so he's really just awesome." So Enoch does this a lot. We will keep seeing Enoch blessing God. So now he's going into the middle of the earth. And when we're talking about that, we're talking again about the flat earth and going into the middle, like the bullseye middle, not a spherical earth, and then going into the center of the earth. So here we actually see this, and we had this situation with mountains and streams. It's a bit odd because it's hard to visualize. Enoch is being able to see the mountain and at the same time see beneath the mountain. And it doesn't really explain how he's able to see that. Is it a sort of X-ray vision? It doesn't really explain what's going on there, how he can see this sort of thing. I don't think Enoch had any ground penetrating radar, for example. And we're also seeing it's a bit dry. There's not a lot of trees. There are some trees, but not a lot of them. There's water. And he says he marveled at this. Yes, I marveled very much. But then in the next chapter, we're told this is a place for the, like a punishment for the people who are accursed. It's for people that speak blasphemies against the Lord. And I thought that was a bit odd. Because when I think of water and I think of flowing river water, I think of hope. I think, well, if we don't have food today, at least we have water. It's a way for us to stay alive. There are trees in some of those places in the previous chapter. Maybe we can make them grow. Maybe I can at least climb up some of these mountains to receive sustenance. So it just seems really odd to me that this place is going to be a place of punishment. Especially because we already saw some very fiery places of punishment. We saw some void and chaos places of punishment, and now we're just seeing rivers. So I thought that was very odd to choose as a place of punishment. In the last couple chapters, last couple verses, it says, "In the days of judgment, over the former, these are righteous people. They shall bless him, Yahweh, for the mercy in accordance with which Yahweh has assigned them. And then I blessed the Lord of glory and set forth his glory and lauded him gloriously. Glory, 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 glory." Is from Enoch shouting unto Yahweh. So he goes to the east, and there's a mountain range in the desert, and he sees this wilderness, but it's full of like awesome things, like trees and plants and water and all this other stuff, rushing like a copious watercourse which flows towards the northwest and cause clouds and dew to ascend on every side. As I was reading this, I thought about every time I've had to tell my geography students about the rain shadow effect. It seemed very similar to that. One of the people in the live chat thought that it was more similar to a river that was running through a rainforest. So those are some of the visuals that we saw just out of the middle of a desert. So it seems a very sudden change that he sees. Here we're in chapter 29. He goes to another place in the desert. It's east of that mountain range that he saw. And there's aromatic trees exhaling the fragrance of frankincense and myrrh. And the trees were also similar to the almond tree. I think it's a really gorgeous way to write that these trees are exhaling this fragrance. If you've never smelled frankincense and myrrh, and you've only heard about them in just like these biblical references or they have to burn this and God likes the smell, or you've heard about Jesus or Yeshua received frankincense and myrrh from the three wise men as they traveled over to him. If you've never smelled frankincense and myrrh, they have a very woody, because they are from a tree. They have a very woody but deep, like masculine cologne kind of musk smell. These are things that people had traded a long time ago, like bees, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. These were used and traded for different types of worship. So the Egyptians used it in ancient Egypt for their worship. These were offered as an incense offering. Even today, people will light incense to do different types of prayer, meditation, or offerings to their gods or spirits. So this concept of an incense offering has been around for quite some time. So this, I just can't imagine how amazing this would have smelled. When we do talk about like the frankincense trade as a trade item in my history class, I do let the students smell frankincense. I have frankincense tears, which we'll talk about in a second as well. And I also have frankincense essential oil and myrrh essential oil, just because I like the smell. There's no like special magical properties to it. Don't worry. They're not from an MLM. Don't worry. But just that smell of all of these trees out of the desert. And one reason you want to remember that they keep talking about the smell is imagine the smells that Enoch probably had to endure. This was not a time period where there was a lot of clean things. It's not to say that people were necessarily disgusting. It's just if there's animals that you're using on the streets to pull your wares to and from the marketplace, those animals are going to leave droppings. You might step in those droppings. This is what you're smelling throughout the day. You might track it into your home. You probably have a small farm of your own. That has its own rich feces kind of smell that you're going to be smelling. You're probably not going to wash your clothes every single day, so you get some of that smell of your body sweat, your animal's spit. These kinds of smells are going to just permeate everything. And for some people, we did talk about this in the group chat, some of us are very sensitive to smells because of things like migraines. Other people kind of go smell blind, quote unquote, where they're around a smell for so long, they stop smelling something. Even when that happens, if you're in this area where you have a farm and it's very, manure scented, but you kind of went smell blind to it, if you're going to attend a religious service, that's when you're going to smell that beautiful frankincense and myrrh. And then when you come out of that building, even if you're going to get used to it quickly, you're still immediately hit with that feces kind of smell, and then it goes back to being smell blind. But that's the kind of place where Enoch was. And so even something that we would consider as simple as a fragrance. Again, I have these frankincense essential oils. I didn't have to go and harvest frankincense. I didn't have to, trade for it and wait for several weeks for it to arrive. I readily had this available. I can put it into a diffuser and my whole room can smell like frankincense in a matter of minutes. So we live in a place where we maybe don't appreciate this kind of smell very deeply. So try to think about it from his point of view, that this place is so beautiful, not just visually, and not that every one of your basic needs are met, but even just smells nice. It just smells nice. So that's such a concept to think about. So he keeps going and he keeps going beyond these, he keeps going east. And he sees this valley that's filled with water. And he sees trees. Again, they're fragrant trees. He sees fragrant cinnamon trees. Remember, cinnamon is a tree. It does come from a tree. Those little curls of cinnamon that you might find in a nice winter latte or something, those are from a tree. It's tree bark. So now he smells this frankincense and myrrh and cinnamon, and he's smelling all of this loveliness together. So he continues to go and sees more trees and mountains, and I'm going to take another sip of this. And he sees them flowering, these beautiful flowering trees. And he continues to look past the mountains towards the ends of the earth, and he sees aloe trees. And they're full of this stuff called stacta. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this 100% correctly, but these are the hard sap. It might look like amber to you, and this is what I was talking about with frankincense tears. These are hard types of sap that you can use if you can make an incense with coals, and you would put these onto the coals. You can also, if you don't have coals in your house right now, you can get a little container of like an oil, just a neutral smelling oil, and then put a frankincense tear in there. And as the oil heats up, it sort of releases some of that frankincense smell. And so that's what these trees are covered with. So now these trees are not only smelling like frankincense, but you can see it. You can see these smell producing chunks of dried sap on there. And he says, and when one burnt it, it smelt sweeter than any fragrant odor. It doesn't say how he knows this. I'm assuming he is told or guessing. Because remember, nobody else is here, right? This is a place just for Enoch, and the angels are kind of flying him around. Maybe one of them burned it and was like, hey, Enoch, check this out. Breaks off a big branch, burns this thing, and it's just like the best smell ever. It doesn't really explain how he got to smell this section of the tree. So he's again looking at these mountains. He's looking towards the north. He's seeing more mountains. He smells more things. Excuse me. He smells peppercorns and cinnamon and these fragrant trees, like the frankincense kind of smells. And he also smells nard. Nard is a few times mentioned in the Bible. It's a flower that grows in this region. So he's going over the summits of the mountains, and so this kind of gives you this idea that he's being flown by the angels. Whether he's held or the angels gave him the power to fly, it doesn't really explain that. But it does say that he was flown, or that he's going over these summits. And he shows up in this place called the Garden of Righteousness. And he sees these trees there, including a tree of wisdom, whereof they eat and know great wisdom. Is this the Garden of Eden? Yes. Is this the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Yes. The way that this tree is described, I will say, is really, really, really not fair. First of all, we can all probably agree that was not really a fair setup for Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, right? They don't know anything about death. They don't know the difference between good and evil. They don't know any of this. And then Yahweh's like, hey, so you can eat everything. Oh, except this one tree. Don't eat it. This will make you know stuff. And you'll die if you eat it. They don't know anything, right? They don't know what that means to have knowledge. They don't know what it means to die. They have no concept of this. And then they're tricked into eating it, and, you know, all end of humanity sort of, you know, in the Garden of Eden kind of happens from that point. But look at the tree. The tree is the height like the fir. So the fir is a type of evergreen tree. It's quite tall. Its leaves are like those of the carob tree. And if we look at the carob tree leaves, we can see that these lovely, flat, shiny leaves. And one thing I tell my geography students is that we have to learn about the coniferous trees, which are those pine needle type of trees. And so I tell them that coniferous is like a cone. The flat ones here are deciduous leaves, and I tell them it's deciduous like delicious. These are the leaves that if you're an animal that eats tree leaves, you're going to want to eat these. I mean, how many of you have actually, when you were little kids, bit into a pine needle just to see what it tasted like? They're not a very pleasant taste. They're very, very strongly flavored. They're difficult to chew. They're difficult to digest compared to these lovely, flat, shiny leaves. And of course, you know, at this region, there are people that make food with different types of leaves, including like grape leaves, for example. So these are leaves that look lovely. They look like they could be edible if you didn't know what this tree was. So they look like they could be edible. The tree is very tall, and it says the fruit is like clusters of the vine. Very beautiful. So there was these, I guess the idea we all hear is that Adam and Eve ate the apple, but when we're looking into did apples actually exist in the region which could be considered where Eden might have been, Probably not, sort of thing. Well, could it have been the quince? Could it have been the pomegranate? I don't know. What could we guess? Blah, blah, blah. It's all just a guess. Here, though, it does appear to be like a grape leaf or a grapefruit. Not a grapefruit, the fruit that is the grape cluster. English. So we're left with these beautiful clustered fruits. And just if you're given a choice of different fruits to eat while you have to sit and do something or talk or taste it, all of the fruits are fruits you've never eaten before, and you have something large like an apple that's the size of your hand, a grapefruit that's the size of your two hands, or you have this cluster of grapes, and you can just pick one off very easily and pop it into your mouth. It's bite-sized. The grape one you do kind of want to pick. They're fun to pick anyway. They have that nice little pop when you bite into them. They're a fun thing to eat, to look at, to touch, to move around into space, picking them off of this vine. And it also has a fragrance that permeates afar. So not only is this a tree you can't eat from, it is like the biggest, nicest looking, most appealing fruit, best smelling tree that you could smell from anywhere else in this garden. Wow. That's really not fair, right? Can you imagine being Adam and Eve? This is like the best looking tree. It's not like, oh yeah, and then there were all the foods that we could eat equally, and they're equally good, and then God puts another one that's as good as those other ones. No. It's better than all of them. This is the most awesome, attractive tree that attracts you to it in every possible way. Visually, you want to touch it, you can smell it, you can, every way. You can just see it from far away too. How fair is this? So, even Enoch, who we can assume he knows what this is. He knows that this is not a tree that you're going to mess with. Even he says, wow, this is an attractive looking tree. Like attractive, like appealing, right? And Raphael is like, yeah, but this is a tree that in days of old, your first father and first mother kind of way that he phrases it. They ate it, they learned wisdom, their eyes were open, and they knew that they were naked and they were driven out of the garden. So this is the Garden of Eden tree. And so he leaves again, and he goes to the ends of the earth, and he sees a lot of beasts, he sees a lot of birds, they have a different appearance, they sound different. And what he also sees in this section are portals of the heavens that open up. And so remember again, we have that flat earth with a dome model. And he sees that there's actual portals opening up, like windows that open. So why are they opening? Well, they're opening because the stars are being let in. And Enoch is furiously trying to write down all of these stars. So each star is coming in. He's trying to count them, write their name, write their course, and write their time, such as winter or late spring or something like that. He's writing about this. This is astronomy he's trying to do. And the other angel, Uriel, actually gets his book and starts writing it down for him because there's just so much to write. How many of you have actually seen the night sky without any nearby lights? It's like a black tablecloth with salt spilled over it. So in previous chapters, Enoch talks about amazing stuff, and he tells us it's marvelous, and he tells us it's vast, and he can't comprehend it, blah, blah, blah. Here, just because we know when we look at the sky, there's so many stars, we see that Enoch is trying to write it down, and Uriel has to take over and write it down for him. We're supposed to get the impression of magnitude here. So that's, instead of Enoch saying, there were so many multitudes I could barely count, or something like that, we're just supposed to understand that this is a huge, huge undertaking that he has attempted. Next, we're going to the north. And what's interesting is that we talk about the north winds, but there's 3 portals. Out of one portal, the good north winds will blow. So things like rain for your crops, or a light dusting of snow, or cool wind, or something like that. From the other two portals, this is where negative north winds come out. We're talking about blizzards or floody, torrential type of rains. So it's kind of interesting to have three portals, one of them's good and two of them are bad. So it's kind of an interesting concept. So he goes to the west, and there's three portals that he saw in the east. So there's three of these portals, and it doesn't exactly tell us what they're for just yet. Okay, he goes to the south, and he sees the south rain portals, or south wind portals, and there's three of them. But then he can now see from this perspective what the east and west portals are for. So the eastern portals will open up and allow stars into the dome. So remember, again, this is the flat earth with the dome thing. They allow them in there, and then they pass through and out of the western portal. So just like we would look at the sky and watch the stars moving, this is how he's explaining that they move. They're being let into our dome through these portals, moving across the sky, and then at the end of their course, or the end of their path, they're exiting through this other portal. Remember, the sun doesn't do this. The sun has its own place to hang out later on. So the sun is separate from this. But this is how he's describing the stars. So for some people, they say that this is a the Bible, or the biblical model, or the old Jewish model of the earth. Well, you could maybe possibly interpret it a certain way. This stuff Enoch is talking about is not just from Enoch's idea. This is what was believed pretty commonly. He's just kind of explaining how it works a little bit more. So it was believed the earth was flat with a dome. There was stuff on the outside, and occasionally Yahweh would open up sections of the dome to allow stuff in. I think we talked before about the torrential rains that came in from, or to flood the earth, that came in from outside of the dome. Yahweh had opened it to allow a bunch of rains to pour into the dome, flood everything, and then opened up a bunch of holes or portals on the ground or underground, and then that's where the water had come out from under the earth and gone back into the cosmos. So that is this kind of idea that people had at that time period, and so this is Enoch just sort of explaining this. Now in the live chat, some people were wondering, was he on drugs, such as a psychedelic drug or something? Usually the use of drugs and so-called spiritual experiences is not anything new. It's still practiced today, and it was definitely practiced long ago. But the stuff that Enoch was writing, again, it's sort of a part two, or to elaborate upon ideas that were already believed at that time period. If it were something like psilocybin, we would expect certain types of things, like Enoch wouldn't have to be flown around. Enoch would just be able to see, for example. He could see through the earth. He wouldn't have to go to the edge of the earth and then look over to physically see it. This could be a dream or a hallucination. And hallucinations don't necessarily require drugs. Our brains, as great as they aren't the best. There's just a lot of stuff that we deal with day to day that we just simply don't register in our brains. There's stuff that we are not looking for, so we are blind to it. There's stuff we're not listening for, so we don't hear it, for example. But this could have been easily created, I think, if I were given the choice of, how do you think this was a hallucination? How do you think it happened? If that was the choice that I had, I would guess that he was doing some dedicated prayer, where we're talking about fasting, we're talking about not drinking water either, and we're talking about denying yourself sleep. Doing those things creates a situation where your brain starts to do its own thing, and you end up with hallucinations. I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about when you've been very tired, but you had to drive, and maybe you stopped suddenly because you thought you saw something run into the road, but actually there was nothing there. So these are ways that your body can create hallucinations. One person had suggested, or actually a couple people thought about ergot poisoning. Ergot is going to be that fungus that grows on wet rye. Rye is not something that grew in this region. That's more of a Europe, Northern Europe kind of thing. But even if they had received it through some sort of trade route, for example, ergot poisoning tends to be quite violent. One of the things in history that could be most likely linked to ergot poisoning is the Salem witch trials. And so those are the witch trials that happened in the American village, or the U.S. village of Salem. A bunch of people were accused, imprisoned, 24-ish people were killed, most of them by hanging, a couple of them, or one of them, by crushing. These were not the burned witches of Europe. These were different. The story kind of goes that there were 3 girls that everybody believed them because everybody was just golly gosh darn so stupid back then, and wow, aren't we so much better because we're smarter, and they just believed these little girls accusing everyone, and the little girls just did it because they liked the attention and they needed power because little girls didn't have power. And okay, maybe. We do know, though, from some of the other reports, it heavily points to ergot poisoning. The girls that were having these fits, these seizures, these were not falling down on the ground and faking having a seizure, kind of screaming a little bit, whatever. This is, you are a large, strong, strapping man. You work your farm, okay? You have a daughter. She's 10 years old. She's not feeling very good. She's vomiting all day. So you have her lie down in bed, you and your wife are sitting down to eat, and you hear suddenly this blood-curdling scream and these thumps as if something is smashing into your wall. So you run to your daughter in her room, because that's where these sounds are coming from, and you see her thrashing so violently on her bed. She's smashing her head into the wall. She's dragging her knuckles across the floor. She's pulling out her own hair. She's shaking violently, and she's screaming that there's some kind of demonic specter that she sees in the doorway. And you, this large man, sit down on the bed to try to hold your little girl from screaming and thrashing and hurting herself, and she's so strong that she's able to almost force you off of her, and you're struggling, trying to stay on the bed, trying to hold her. This is how violent ergot makes people. There's been also other times in history where people in a village just suddenly started jumping out of windows and dying. And they weren't doing it because they were suicidal. They were screaming that something was chasing them, and they had to get out of it. So they were having these really bad hallucinations. Some people can link ergot poisoning and what else? Werewolves, for example. That type of violence and feeling just like you're not yourself, and you feel like you're literally turning into an animal, and you hallucinate that you're just this wild beast. Also, by the way, the Salem trials, they also found out that a lot of the animals had started dying. So imagine now you have this situation with your daughter, and the next day you go to farm and all your animals are dead. None of them were sick the day before. There's no blood anywhere to show that maybe your neighbor had killed them or an animal had come to attack them. They're just dead. And you have no idea why. And you ask your neighbor, hey, did you see anything? And your neighbor's like, all my animals are dead too, man. I don't even know. So you go ask your daughter, hey, sweetie, what was that thing you said you were seeing last night? Your daughter's taking breaks from puking, and she tells you, oh, it was because we had consulted with the working lady, Tituba, and blah, blah, blah. And so they put Tituba into the prison, and they possibly kill her, and none of this stops. And so now, we have several witches among us, At that time period, that's sort of your only reasonable concept of what it could have been. It doesn't mean it's logical, but that was the reasoning, within your worldview. So ergot poisoning definitely causes mass hallucinations, but not that would be able to produce this coherent text. I would say there would be a lot more stuff in here that could point to ergot poisoning if Enoch had been feeling as if he was possessed, feeling violent and seeing terrible, terrible things. But even though we're talking about journeying the earth and journeying Sheol, really we're not talking about Sheol as a hell, are we? We've talked a bit about a place for stars and angels to be punished. We talked about a waiting room, and then the rest of it is just like, this is a place for the righteous, and here's just kind of how the earth works. So it's sort of an interesting thing to look through. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I enjoyed doing it. If you guys have any questions, of course, please put it in the comments section below, and I'll see you later. Have a good day. Bye.